Thank you and good afternoon. As was said, I've been in the biology department at Northeastern for 21 years. I've taught a lot of students, and I'm going to try to give you a glimpse into what a couple of my classes look like. Typically, I teach very, very large classes of 200 to 300 students at a time in general biology, which is a biology course that students take if you are not a biology major, but not if you're not in science. I teach pharmacy students, health science students, and really anyone who wants to take biology. I've also taught anatomy and physiology for a number of years, and then I teach an upper level course with 40 to 60 students probably in invertebrate zoology, which is one of my areas of specialty. And when I was thinking about the question about how, as an instructor, I choose materials for a biology course, I came up with a really short answer, and I could probably, be done in 2 minutes. And that short answer was, I just read this really interesting article. I have 300 kids. I think I'll make them all read it, and we can talk about it. Or I'll put it in Blackboard, and we'll have a quiz on it to make sure that they actually read the article and got out, what I wanted them to, from it. So that really is my short answer. And I could be done, but I thought a little bit more, about it, and thought that there were probably some other things that I would like to share with you about, how I choose materials for my class. And there are really two things in particular that I consider when I'm looking for materials, whether it's a textbook, whether it's articles for discussion, whether it's laboratory materials. And those two things are really, where's the student at? What's the competence of the student in dealing with the subject and dealing with the material that I want them to look at? Are they biology majors? Are they non-majors? If they're non-majors, I may want them to have a general understanding, whereas if they're majors, they need to learn to talk the talk and walk the walk as a scientist. So in fact, our goals for those students in the course may be very different. Is this an introductory course? I largely teach freshmen. I see them on their very first day of college. And I have them all year, and there's a lot of growth that goes on, in particular for freshmen in that first year, not only academically but also socially. So is it an introductory course, or is it a more specialized course? Is it a course that students are going to take in the middle of their program or toward the end of their program when we're getting them ready to go out into the real world? So those are things that we want to consider. So when I look at material, certainly when I'm thinking about non-majors, when I'm thinking about introductory students, I may in fact turn to the popular press. I may look at, National Geographic and National Wildlife Federation and American Scientist or Scientific American or Audubon or any number of other, popular press, types of publications. Whereas if I'm designing an assignment for biology majors, I'm going to look certainly at the primary literature. I'm going to go to the science, to the nature, and send them to those resources. But the problem that comes up, and this is where that competence of the student really comes into play, when it comes to thinking about the primary literature, that primary literature is really written by the experts, written for the experts. And in fact, when you think about, by the experts and for the experts, if you are new to the field, if you are a freshman, reading that primary literature is going to seem like a foreign language, and you don't really have the tools necessarily to decode that foreign language. So that's really where I, as an instructor, come in trying to kind of guide them through that process. Because even for me, as a non-expert in, a wide variety of biologically oriented fields, it becomes a lot of jargon. It really becomes impenetrable jargon if you don't, if you're not an expert in that field. So in this guided process, oftentimes I might start at the level of the popular press. So for those introductory students or for the non-majors, I may keep it in that popular press realm. Or I may have them go from popular press to review articles, or from review articles into the primary literature. So that really becomes kind of a guided process that goes along with their development as scientists. Certainly for the non-majors, certainly for the introductory students, we're going to look at popular press first, and we may keep it in that realm. Whereas for the upper level students, for the biology majors, we want them to be able to very quickly in their academic careers get into that primary literature, but they're going to need some help in order to do that. I want them to understand also the importance of citable literature, the idea of peer-reviewed work. being what they turn to for their references. But again, they really need some help in trying to understand, the terminology and the process of what they're reading. They have to have a good grounding in the scientific method to understand, where that information came from, and the idea that that information has been reviewed by a body of peers before it makes it into, publication. Again, it's that idea of very, very specialized literature that we want to make accessible for them. So I'm not really going to, start right there. So I give you a couple of samples from my class. It's a list of things that I would use in general biology. And that's also where this idea of goals of the assignment come into play. What do I want the students to get out of a particular assignment? Am I trying to excite them? Am I trying to spark their interest in a particular area? Do I want them to have informed awareness? Do I want them to understand, current issues, like climate change, for example? Certainly or stem cells, they're certainly making the news. Do I want them to be able to understand what they're seeing in the popular press? Because certainly one of the drawbacks about popular press is that, oftentimes there's a bias in it. Audubon may have an agenda. National Wildlife Federation may have an agenda that they are promoting in their particular publications, and sometimes students need to be able to make decisions about, what they're reading and look at it critically as well. So is it an informed awareness? Do I want my students to see applications? Well, that first example on the top there it happens to be an article about marine pharmaceuticals. Because I teach pharmacy students, and sometimes pharmacy students don't understand why they need to know about jellyfish. They have a hard time making those connections, but in fact, there are some really important proteins that we get from jellyfish. So I may assign them articles to kind of flesh out, and make connections between what they're seeing in class and some real-world applications of that material. So a lot of my articles tend to run along those lines. So when we talk about cancer, I actually bring in Tasmanian devils, which are currently endangered. They make the news. They have a really unique form of cancer that they can transmit from one to another by biting each other. So again, they can get that real-world application of the material, in that way. And again, at a level that's appropriate for where their understanding of biology, might be at the time. Now, in my invertebrate zoology class, I would assign the top article on marine pharmaceuticals, because invertebrate zoology is a lot about the marine environment. But then I would follow it up with an article that's at a little bit higher level. This one in particular happens to be, a review article, because again, it's good to go from a very general to a little bit more specific. And from there, they can take it, another step further, but I would have those students at a higher level then go into that primary literature, whether it's review article or go a little bit even further. So that's a snapshot of, some things to consider, but the goals of the assignment is certainly one that's very important in looking at, what you want the students to get out of a particular assignment and picking materials that really, go along with that. Just to show you a little bit more about what my materials in class look like, I took a sample from my general biology class. This is where I have, 300 students basically all year. And choosing the textbook is something that's challenging, partly because I want it to be a cost-effective solution for the students. Textbooks, particularly in the sciences, as you know, are extremely expensive. And the book that I've chosen for me right now is a good compromise. This is not an ad for this particular book, but I can tell you why I chose this particular book. This particular book is one that's very new. It's from Nature Education. It is a strictly online textbook. Now, I've used it, this is my second year. I've finished my second year. I've gotten a lot of feedback from the students on this particular book. For freshmen, not having a paper textbook is a really big challenge. For them, they don't like it. Some of them don't like it come the end of the year. There are days when I don't like having the paper, not in my hand while I'm reading, although you certainly can print things out from this particular book. But this particular book costs them about $60, which is hugely different to the $200 that the bookstore is charging them for other textbooks. And pedagogically, which is really more important for me, there are a number of bells and whistles that come with this book that I happen to like, and I'm going to show you a few of what those are. As I said, it's strictly online. It is available across a lot of platforms, including smartphones and tablets, as well as their laptops. It's customizable, and in particular, what's important is that it's based in research. It's based in the primary literature, and in particular, it has obvious links to Nature and Scientific American. In particular, because biology as a field changes so quickly, one of the advantages to this particular book is that it's updated. And when the book is updated, all of the subscribers get access to those updates immediately for their lifetime. So it's having this up-to-date book all the time, which for my students, many of them, want to go into medical school. They're going to need their biology books later on. I think that this is a good, solution for them. It's at a university level, and to show you a little bit more about what the book looks like, it's arranged in modules, and in particular, the reason I really like this book is that it's interactive, and it's interactive immediately. You don't have to be able to read any of this, and I know it might be hard for some of you, but what you're looking at down at the bottom there happens to be a cell. And if, in fact, as you're reading along in the text, you get to one of these interactive boxes, this one in particular, you can scroll across any one of those components of the cell and get more information about it. In other cases, it's interactive in that throughout the text there are questions. And I know that when I read a textbook and get to one of those questions, I read the question and I keep going, which is probably what my students do as well, unfortunately. But in this particular case, there are boxes where you can type the answer, and the student will immediately find out whether or not they got it right. So there's this constant kind of checking feature, whereas before, you could write down your answer and you'd have to go to the back of the book or to some other resource to actually find out whether you got the right answer. And I know that typically the freshmen aren't going to do that, because it's going to take them, twice as long to actually get through, that material. So it's a very interactive text. And over on the very far side of it, hopefully you can also see a couple of the other kind of bells and whistles that I like about this book. And that is the links directly to the primary literature, as well as some of those articles that give us applications for the material. Now, I certainly can assign those, or the students on their own can go to those very, very easily. And in particular, some of those links where it says science on the web there will take you to the nature education resource known as Citable. Now, Citable will take a wealth of articles that are nature education based, and they will rank them according to the level of that article. So you've got some at the basic level, some at the intermediate level, some at the advanced level. So the students can do this on their own. I can assign articles certainly from here. And again, these are what some of the ones look like that I have assigned. Again, emergent properties, for an example, happens to be a very difficult concept for first-year biology students. So I'll pick an article that's at a basic level. As we go on this semester, and we've talked about genetics, I'll pick an article that's at a more intermediate level. If I'm looking for something that's going to be application-based so that they can see the relevance of what we're doing in class, I'll send them to these articles that are called lenses on biology. All right, so it lets me and it lets them very easily get to a lot of further information. Again, increase that sort of guided process as we go along, getting them more and more into thinking like a scientist, talking like a scientist, as a biologist. In invertebrate zoology, we're certainly going to start at a different point. This is an upper level course for about 40 to 60 students, and I've chosen a textbook that is very, very widely used. I've chosen it in particular because it's a manageable book. It's not encyclopedic. Anytime I'm looking at a textbook, I want to make sure that the students are getting the bang for their buck really out of that material. So this is a book we use it in its entirety. Pretty much cover to cover, we cover the content of this book. And that's really another important piece for me, is that I want the students to feel like they got their money's worth out of making that kind of investment, because this is a $200 book, in a very specialized area. So we really do use a lot of it. And I've chosen this book in particular because, again, it's based in the primary literature. So in every single one of the chapters, there'll be a box that looks like this. It's called the Research Focus Box. And again, it's not primary literature in its entirety. It's a synopsis of primary literature. It has the actual article listed there at the top. So if, in fact, the student wants to go and look at that primary literature, they certainly can. At the end of each one of the chapters, these are kind of a godsend for me as an instructor, because they're called topics for further discussion. And this particular author actually writes out a lot of questions on the content from that book, as well as providing the primary literature that goes along with that. So if I want to do a discussion, or I want students to think about term paper kinds of assignments, I certainly tell them, pick an animal group, start here. Start with your book and then go into the primary literature that's suggested by this expert, and see where you can go with it. So it makes it easy for me. And again, this one in particular also has links to the web. So it gives the students a really good starting point. And again, that idea of peer-reviewed, material, for them to use as their basis is something certainly in upper-level biology courses we want them to pay particular attention to and really be able to come out of the course being able to read. So those are two courses that I've taught for a number of years. I'm teaching a new course, hopefully next spring, in human parasitology. This is a course that's related to some other courses that I've taught, but this is a brand new area for me. So in this particular case, I have to do what the students do. And that is, I had to Google it. All right? So anytime I'm looking for a new area, that's where I'm going to start. And that's where I'm going to tell my students to start. Google it, Google Scholar it, depending upon, what kind of material you're looking for. So I had to come up with a course description. Actually, I'm retooling an existing course and kind of bringing it down to a broader level. We have a parasitology course that's taught for juniors, seniors, and graduate students. I'm going to pitch it to a younger audience, basically, kind of sophomores level. So I have to bring the content down, so I started with Google. I typed in human parasitology to see what kinds of courses were out there, what are my colleagues using in their courses. I had to write a syllabus in order to get this course approved. So I borrowed theirs very heavily. I looked at material from Rutgers and from Kansas State and from the University of Georgia and from Michigan State, and I looked at their syllabi, I looked at their assignments, I looked at what kind of tutorials I could borrow from them, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If it's a good course at another place, I can make it fit and be a good course at Northeastern too. So there was a wealth of information out there, almost overwhelming. But it's a very specialized area. I also then went from there, once I had my syllabus, I went into the Northeastern Library. I did our Scholar One Search, which is our tool on campus that all students have access to as well, and I just typed in the general area to see what resources we had available to us in the library. I intend on consulting our biology librarian when I'm looking for different reading materials, for different assignments, to see what help they can provide. And again, what kinds of resources do we have available to us in our immediate campus. But this also takes you to things like the Web of Science and a number of other databases directly as well to kind of broaden things out. So far, I've chosen a textbook. Happens to be one that's used pretty widely. And on my summer reading list are the two lists that you see down, the two books that you see down at the bottom. Again, they give it more of a, general feel to things, parasite. At the beach, people look at you funny when you're reading, people, parasites, and plowshares. They don't necessarily want to sit next to you or be your friend. But, that's my summer reading. So again, I'm doing a lot of what I expect my students to do when they get to, new topic, new material. I'm in the midst of kind of going through that process. So I'm, getting this particular course ready, so it's a snapshot of it. A couple of other of my favorite resources, student-driven resources. I have a lot of students, and I start the semester always with the idea that we're talking about general biology, which is an enormous field. No one can be an expert on general biology. There are lots of areas within that, and I certainly can't keep up with the exploding information that's out there on the web and in print. So I asked the students to help me. I ask them to, when they read one of those really interesting articles, I tell them to send it to me, because I might like it, other people in the class might like it, and what you see here is just a list of articles and topics that I've gotten just over the last year from my kids. I'll get things on Genghis Khan, and genetics, and the narwhal tusk, and cellular respiration. And sometimes I'll get articles from kids that have left my class, 2 or 3 years prior. They were out reading something, Dr. Potts-Santone would really like this article, and they'll send it to me. So that increases the database and the resources that I can, again, provide to the students. So that's really one of my favorite ways to find, really cool, up-to-date stuff, whether it's Science Daily News or, whatever they happen to be reading, and coming across. When I deliver my courses, I happen to use Blackboard, which is our university platform course management system, very extensively. And what my course looks like is that I would provide them PowerPoint lectures. They can print those out. They should bring them to class. They should take lots of notes because I talk really fast. I also provide them with lecture capture, which is, we have Tegrity. Tegrity is a system where it will record the audio. It can also record the video, but I don't ever want to watch it. So I just do the audio synced to the PowerPoint slides, and that's a tool that students really get quite a lot out of because they can then relive lecture in their dorm rooms, at the gym, when they're studying. Our student athletes on the road tap into it. Students where English is a second language that may have a hard time in a biology class where the vocabulary is going to be more specialized right off the bat. They can go back, they can review, they can search the recordings. That's become something that's a very, very useful tool. Blackboard also lets me guide my students through the materials of the semester, so they will have access to lectures. They will also have access to YouTube videos that I think are cool, that I want them to watch. Some I may show in class, some I may just say, go watch this on your own. And again, students that run across really cool YouTube videos tend to send them to me. So I get a lot of wealth of information that way, but you'll see some there that include, things on malaria, things on, if you've never seen a snake eating an egg, it's really cool. They eat the egg whole and then it spits out the shell. That one really gets them, especially at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I can guide them through, again, a lot of resources, and what Blackboard lets me do is, again, keeps it that sort of very guided process where they know what I want them to see. And then from there, I can take them to, again, a lot of articles, web links, web resources. And in particular, again, these may not be assigned to them, but again, just my way of enhancing their experience and telling them what kinds of resources I think are very useful, what they may want to look at. Because again, what I want them to gain out of my class is a way to, enhance the learning experience and make the material accessible for them. So that's really what I wanted to show you about my courses. I'm happy to answer a few questions now, and again, I know there'll be time for questions at the end as well. All right, so that's kind of your snapshot into biology courses and choosing materials for the biology course. Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
For your upper level, the last book you chose, how much did the publishers ask their materials, whether it's test banks or slides or anything, come into play? Did you contact the publisher for them? Did you go to the publisher's website for them?
Nope, I didn't.
Did you get anything from them?
Not the ancillary materials that come with the textbook. Sometimes, I have books that I use. I've used, the Connect system with McGraw-Hill. I've used a number of those. I don't rely on those. Again, they're really just supplementary materials. I really just look to see what my colleagues were using. I contacted the publisher for a desk copy. I won't look at the slides and why that doesn't factor into my decision. Because really what I use in the classroom, I may start with those ones that come from the publisher, but I'm going to retool them so that it really looks like what I want my class to be. So those really just become a starting point for me. What the test bank says really, it's nice to have, especially when you're trying to write multiple choice questions because they take forever. It's nice to have a starting point, and that's really what those supplemental materials become for me, is a starting point. But again, they need to be customizable, for my class. Yeah.
Did you annotate within the online textbook? That's something that our instructors are experimenting with.
I have not done it. I have not done the annotations. The students do have the capacity for highlighting, for taking their own notes. And one of the other cool things about it is as they take notes with the textbook, it will give them a printout at the end of flashcards, which is kind of cool. I usually have to show them how to get to that, but that is something that's possible because, again, that idea of they like highlighting. Unfortunately, most of them color when they highlight, so I don't always show them that right off the bat. But I usually do tell them how to get, the note cards from it, the flashcards from it, to enhance that process. But I have not annotated.
Can I ask you just one more question?
Sure.
Did you have to do any type of instruction or have your librarians do any type of instruction how to use the book, the online book?
The online book, I usually spend a little bit of time on the very first day. And that's pretty much all it's been. And again, the feedback coming back from the students at the end of the semester is still mixed. You know, especially for freshmen, it can be an overwhelming thing to get used to that online book, to not have the paper. But for some of them, they really love it, others really hate it. So far, it's been kind of a work in progress.